Thanks everyone for joining. This is our new Bechtle webinars, and this is the first one, which is called Find Your Edge, the Infrastructure for Tomorrow. These webinars are going to run every other Thursday, covering various different technologies from both business leaders and industry experts and technology experts within our industry as well. You can sign up to the webinars individually, or you can also sign up to receive the monthly webinar list. The webinars that we build are purely based on the feedback and ideas that come from our customers. So this platform has really been created by you, for you. So please continuously share your ideas so that we can find the research and build some content ready for you guys to listen to. As you can see, we have upgraded our webinar platform to GoToWebinars, so the layout is slightly different. If you have any questions, please can you use the chat/question tab, which, John, if you don't mind just pressing the next slide, you will see where that is there. If you have a question midway through, we will actually try to answer it just to keep the relevance there as well. But don't worry if you miss the opportunity. At the end of every session, we do a Q&A when questions can be covered both via the chat function as well as by raising your hand, and we'll unmute you as well. So everyone is actually on mute at the moment, except the presenters. We do record these webinars, so if you would like to see them again or share them with someone in your organization, please do so. They're all saved on the website where you signed up for this webinar. And also we publish it to our YouTube channel as well. So plenty of content. So I really hope you enjoy it. And yeah, on that note, I'm going to hand over to John Moore and Justin Edhouse to take it from here. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ajay. I will be on shortly just to show you that I am real and it's not just a voice in the background. Yeah, I'm John Moore. I'm the hybrid infrastructure consultant at Bechtle, and with me this morning will be Justin Edhouse, who's our CTO, to really talk around the idea of edge and really have a bit more of an insight into what edge is. There's no excuse around the finding your edge because actually marketing have kind of taken over this, and you know, I don't blame them for that. We have to explain what edge is in simple terms. But if you catch us using things like phrases like IoT when we're talking about edge to try and make it a nice, easy picture to fit into, then you should be complaining straight away. The edge is elusive, but the core message today is it's not a place or a location. It's a specification, a business need, a set of requirements, and a challenge for IT departments to overcome. In terms of the agenda, we're going to really be talking about why we're talking about edge in the first place, finding and understanding where edge is, talk a little bit around the solutions on the edge, and then hopefully help you understand how modernizing your edge strategy and where we can help you on that journey. There's really quite a lot of hype around edge, particularly right now, and you'll have heard phrases like fog and core and edge, and many of these have been borrowed from application development terms or you know, easy fixes in terms of trying to understand where people are, you know, where stuff is. So the idea is, you know, let's strip this back. If we remember anything from today's discussion, it's the fact that the edge is not a location, it's a strategy. So why are we talking about the edge? Well, you'll excuse the slide. As an Englishman in a castle, I felt I had to get it in somewhere. But this is our old data center strategy. We had a castle, a data center where we put all of our valuable data inside. We built a moat around it, which gave us this massive security layer. And because we pulled all of that resource and we kept it in one place in terms of skills management, in terms of resource, it was a lot easier to manage. It made a lot of sense. The downfall of this is we have a kingdom to look after. We have things happening out on the edge of our kingdom that requires requires different techniques. By the time we get all of our our data and processing from the edge of the kingdom all the way back through the security layers that we've got, process it and send it back. The latency is too high. The resource required to ship the data backwards and forwards was too much, and that's really where this idea of moving outside of the castle moat strategy came from. Now, there are many reasons for this. It's not just latency. We've got security, resource requirements, management of that, compliance, data integrity. There are lots of reasons why we might want to move out of this model, but that's why we're now talking edge. We're literally talking about handling our data in a different way than the old castle and moat strategy. In simple terms, you'll all be aware of cloud and the fact that we still laugh now about, cloud. There's the famous strapline of cloud is someone else's computer. Well, edge is just another one of your data centers. It's just another area that you're processing data. It could well be in the cloud. It could well be a remote location. It could well be a warehouse or shop. It's not the location. It's another data center. It's where we're processing that data separately. So the point of today really is to not only identify what edge is, but then how we're translating edge in terms of the business, the data, the compliance, and the performance. So I'll pass you over to Justin now, who's going to really start discussing around how we're going to find and understand that edge.
Lovely, thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so John's absolutely right that it is a marketing term, the edge, and I think that it can sometimes be very misleading. That castle and moat thing, that goes back a long way, but for many people it was a very tangible thing. For business leaders and IT leaders together, they all understood, they had a company. Inside of that company were the people, and the people were protected inside the castle with the data. So it didn't matter whether you were coming out from an IT perspective or a business and understanding. The moat and castle was really straightforward. But again, as technology has changed, that's allowed us to deliver our data and our workloads in different places and in different ways. Right now, for example, we're delivering things differently. In fact, never more so than right now. So marketing companies took that, and yeah, they've been really quite divisive about it, and they've said, right, we've got a product set, we can define an edge, and that fixes a solution. But the reality is that everybody's edges are different. And the challenge is to understand your own edges, where they are and what they mean to you, and what they mean to your business, more importantly. So if we take a look at the technologies that have really changed this for us, 4G is a really great example. That great network has allowed us to move our data to other places, to process our data in other places. So it really has changed things. That combined with storage and compute resources have been shrunk and improved in performance. That allows us to do things, again, radically different at the end point, not necessarily at the center. So yes, it definitely, when we're talking about edges, technology is the influencer, technology is the enabler of the edge, but actually business is still the driver. Fundamentally, it's about your business and what it needs and how technology benefits that need. We hear about, obviously, fog. Fog's an interesting one, isn't it? Data processing, really. It's about, I've got something out there, there's data involved, and fog is basically a different way of processing it, more local to that resource. Public cloud has been a real enabler. They're great technologies, they really are, but are they right for you? Do they fit your strategy? Well, actually, the strategy is derived from understanding the importance of those locations and whether they need looking after and what they need looking after with. So I think there's a very clear difference about what the marketeers of the world say about the edge. That they want to define it as SD-WAN, or they want to define it as kind of something else. That's their own requirements, not yours. So the truth is, to define your edge, you have to understand what your business requirements are, what the risks are, what the compliance requirements are, and more importantly, how you can gain advantage, a business advantage for treating your edges correctly and giving it the right technical solution to deliver real benefit. So I think that yeah, it's a very different take on the edge, and I think it's one that I think is more important. And I think that you could all go away and really think about your edges and understand them better. We've obviously got a lot more to talk about in this session, and later on we'll be talking about, once you do understand your edges, or even maybe you don't understand your edges, what can we do to help you? So I'll hand back to John now.
Thanks, Justin. So I wanted to talk a little bit around solutions. I think in terms of edge, it's important that we don't lead with product. Obviously, marketing, IoT. There we are. Said it again. We'll tell you that there's a one-size-fits-all, one vendor solves all the problems. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But what I want to think about is, what do those solutions look like? And so, in the middle of the slide there, you can see some of the things that are the kind of things for me that define that this is edge. This is another one of my data centers, and the kind of decisions that will decide, which vendor, which product, which solution matches my need. Particularly around things like compliance, backup, the level of compute data required, some of the key things in terms of decision making. In terms of what I want to do really is talk a little bit around those solutions around the outside. So in terms of hardware platforms, a myriad of platforms have been launched over the last kind of 12 months from all of the major suppliers. So without a comprehensive list, we've got people like Lenovo with the SE350, which is a half width 1U server. The HP Edgeline products, which again built specifically to live in conditions that we wouldn't normally be used to. Dell with the XE2420, which is kind of a shallow depth. It's a 2U server, but it would fit in a network rack. It's only half depth. Allows lots of room for extra disk capacity and that kind of stuff. But more importantly, in the past, we only saw these products via niche players in the market, and now pretty much all of the major vendors are offering those out. But what they're also offering out is a different feature set. So typically we saw just a small server, maybe it was air cooled rather than using fans. But actually what we're seeing now are servers that have an operating temperature of 55 degrees. That tells me now I can run this in an environment where I don't have air conditioning. So as long as I have some kind of airflow, I can run my server quite happily. They quite often have different mounting options. So in the case of the Lenovo SE350, off the shelf, I can buy a wall mount system whereby all of the ports are hidden so that no one can gain access to the server. I also have a load of other new feature sets in terms of, for instance, tamper sensors. So the SE350 as an example, if I lift the lid on it, there is the ability to wipe all of the data before anyone gets access to the drives inside. If it's in a remote location I can't look after. It also has a gyroscope in it, so that if I remove it from a rack, I don't even have to take the lid off. If I take it out of a rack and move it, the server knows that it's being tampered with, and therefore, if you're depending on your security compliance, can do something about that. But we also have a whole bunch of other technologies that have been around and have now come to maturity. So, the one that strikes me straight away is SSD. The price of SSDs are falling massively, and definitely in terms of small capacity, it's now cheaper to put in an SSD drive than it is a high RPM based small capacity drive. Multi-core processors, are the density of that has increased exponentially without seeing a massive jump in cost. Technologies like dedupe and compression allow us to increase that density, but also allow us to do things like, you know, backup and business continuity without having to put in the massive amounts of resource that we were putting in terms of bandwidth. And in real terms now, you know, we can literally put a 3-node completely resilient cluster into a remote location, including all the software costs and install costs and maintenance, for less than $7,000. So, you know, we're now talking about being able to give that level of compute resilience and everything else for pretty much the cost of a server, you know, where we were going back before. We then create a whole bunch of new problems, and this is really where the management bit fits into. But again, we've got some nice solutions around there in terms of what we call ecosystem products. So we have the likes of Nutanix, Scale, VMware with their extended plugin architecture, you know, all giving us much more than having to manage each cluster, each server, each virtual machine separately. You may not be aware of switch fabrics. So most of the major vendors now have switches that feed back to the hypervisor, so that I can literally see which cable is plugged from which virtual machine and virtual switch into which physical switch and which port, and map the VLANs through and everything else. Again, in terms of visibility in remote locations and trying to troubleshoot, I can diagnose a broken cable without having to have someone, you know, set up a video screen or send an engineer out to site. And this extends all the way through. So, you know, I've talked about the kind of infrastructure players like Nutanix and Scale and VMware, but we also have the network players. So, you know, if we look at people like Cisco and the Meraki product line, you know, actually, there's very, very rarely do you actually need to log on to the physical device itself. Everything is managed through the cloud-based interface. Aruba Instant AP, another great example of not requiring to manage the device itself, but managing the service. In terms of licensing, the one that I, you know, always make sure that we talk to people about is VMware's Robo licensing edition. That allows you to run up to a limited number of VMs, but without the restrictions of hardware. So normally you'll be aware that we license VMware and products like VMware per processor. So if I just want a simple 3-node cluster, actually the largest cost there is the software, not the hardware. And so Robo Edition allows me to run, if I want, a 5-node cluster, but I can only run up to a certain number of VMs. And so really allows for that flexibility in terms of that remote location, and helps keep the value right. That's extended into other environments. So, you know, in terms of the likes of Veeam and Nutanix, I can price on a per VM basis, and so we can make that much more efficient. There's also the no cost or high value, however you want to see that, in terms of hypervisors. So, you know, we're seeing a proliferation of that in terms of there is Hyper-V. Obviously, you've probably already paid for your Windows licensing. You're able to use Hyper-V as the hypervisor, and we have the likes of Scale with KVM, the likes of Nutanix with AHV, and, you know, providing very capable hypervisors that are giving us the functionality we need without having to embark on extra licensing costs. And then some of the licensing providers also have starting to become more flexible in that approach. So, you know, if you look at things like the Microsoft transportability in terms of being able to move licenses around and not having to license every server, even if that server is not being used. But I guess the one that's the real killer for most people in terms of those other locations is the resource and services that's required to look after those. But even in those terms, we've got a number of proactive services now that are delivered as a standard. We don't have to go out and find real niche players to be able to provide this. So most most vendors now are supplying as standard a kind of rack and stack service where they'll turn up, unpack, plug the servers in, and in the case of some of the more modern architectures, we can actually deploy all of those servers remotely. Now, yes, we're going to use some bandwidth and there's a load of stuff to copy over the WAN, but that can happen overnight and it saves me having to send an engineer down for 2 or 3 days to rack it, test it, get it up and running, and then start putting live services on it. We can now do all the deployment centrally and push that out. There's plenty of proactive support options. So we're now able to look after the whole stack in terms of support. We're also able to start looking at failures in advance and telling you that you're going to have a failure. And again, these technologies have been maturing for some time, but they're now at a point where it's pretty seamless in terms of part turning up on site and you getting a notification of that. And those tools have developed really well. And what's great to see is manufacturers have turned those from a kind of pay to use service into part of the core product offering. So, if you look at things like Lenovo's xClarity, HP InfoSight, we have the ability to see all of our estate, to know the fact that we have a firmware problem, we need to update firmware because it's urgent, or firmware will need to be updated in the next 3 months. We're able to see that globally across our fleet without having to drill down on each one, run reports, work out which is an important bug fix, which one isn't. I can see when power supplies are starting to run at high speed, alarms kicked off, emails sent, automatically placing support tickets. And then there's plenty of now third-party technical services that have been designed around the as a service model. So when I need to, when I need that level 3 engineer, actually I don't need to pay a very expensive support contract to have someone on standby all the time. I pay as you go, and my consumption is relative to the payment I'm going to see. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's where we see kind of the solutions on the edge part at the moment. So I'm going to hand back to Justin to talk a little bit more about how we can benefit from kind of modernizing that.
Thanks, John. So I want to start with a very practical demonstration of modernizing your edge. For those of you that know me well, they'll know that I've been with Bechtle since the dark ages. So I've been lucky enough to actually see how the group's edge strategy has changed. To the Bechtle group, the UK is an edge to their network. It's a very important edge, obviously, I would say that. But for them, we're a part of their strategy. So in the days when we started, that we had servers that were providing us CRM systems and mail systems, and there was all sorts of things that drove our business, and we needed them here in the UK because, well, it just wasn't deliverable remotely. So we grew and we grew and we grew, and we went from a small number of servers to an entire rack. But of course, then we started to see these paradigm shifts in technology. And whilst we carried on growing, what happened was the kit started shrinking. That rack never went beyond the rack, and still isn't beyond a rack now from a server storage perspective, because actually we can do more in a smaller footprint. So it started shrinking. We started using more services. We did it with less equipment because we were modernizing the UK as an edge. But then it became really interesting because that optimization of equipment was just part of the journey. We also saw huge improvements in the network. Now, when we're talking about network, obviously the core of our network is Germany. So the network got that good that Germany then started thinking, do we need, as a strategy, as we're expanding, do we need to deliver it in this way because it's complicated? It's a remote edge. There are less IT people there. There are less resources there to do the internal IT stuff than there is centrally, where there's 10,000 people in some buildings across an estate in Heilbronn, so and Neckarsulm. So actually, they started to change their strategy. They said, well, we don't need to do that anymore. We can now start pulling those services back in, which, bearing in mind what we spoke about earlier on with the castle and the moat, actually, our edge disappeared. It went back into the castle. So, but this comes from, again, a shift in technologies. We could do that. It made sense to do that because we understood what we needed to deliver. We understood what technologies are available to deliver it. And so we went through the entire journey. We went through the scaling up. We went through the cost and complexity, and then reducing complexity, reducing cost. And then we started to move it to somewhere where we could actually mitigate the risk of having all that technology in the outlying edges. So actually the benefits from modernizing your edge can be many. And again, it comes from understanding the value of that edge to you as a business, and the performance required by that edge to your business. And then it's down to you to understand that, and we can help you articulate the technologies that can make that better for you once we understand what it is your business needs. And I think that's a really important point. I think many people today still think that we're just some kind of corner shop where they can come along and buy what they need. Well, actually, no, we are absolutely immersed in technology, technologies that can drive your business. So what we want to do is help you assess what you need, to help you understand your edges. And from that perspective, we've designed a whole bunch of things that can help you engage with us and help you drive improvements at your edges. I'll hand back to you, John.
Okay, thanks, Justin. So yeah, I mean, Justin mentioned there that we have a thing that we call the Bechtle journey, which kind of really aptly describes our engagement with customers, and what the premise of this really is, I guess, as a call to action at the end of this. We've hopefully told you a little bit around the fact that edge isn't a place, it's a strategy. There are reasons why you might want to process stuff on the edge. There are reasons why you might want to leave it back in the data center. The most important thing around there is the enablement in terms of technology to help you to meet those business goals. And so we typically take on an engagement in this fashion: understand, design, deploy, support. And the first part of that really is the assessment phase, is the looking at the business priorities, the drivers for change, and looking at internal capabilities around the resource and infrastructure you currently have. And to that end, to kind of wind down the call before questions and answers, one of the services that we do have, I call it free of cost. It's not free in terms of resource, because both the customer and us are going to spend quite a bit of time running this and coming out with the results. But there's no financial cost. The idea of the report is the reason why I bring this one up, particularly in terms of the edge, is one of the things that's quite often being asked is there a better way to do things than we're doing right now? And so the report itself includes everything you would kind of want to see in terms of the status of your current assets, and really that's around the utilization of those resources, and where you're underutilizing, overutilizing, and what best fits. And the kind of typical examples I'd use where this has been really successful is where we found people that are that having to run compute, they're running compute centrally, they're not doing it on the edge because of the cost of that. When we footprint the resource required to run it on the edge, they can actually do it fairly efficiently and cost effectively, where they need to run it, which also then frees up more space in their core system. Typically, if we're looking at systems that are 5-6 years old, we're almost replacing with modern infrastructure. We're almost replacing on a 3-to-1 basis. So if you're currently running a server room with 12 servers in it, you probably only need 3 or 4. That has a massive impact in terms of licensing, cooling, power, management, and so again, this is all part of that assessment process. But the one bit underneath there that I kind of highlight really is this is the kind of thing that we'll be discussing and we show you as part of that assessment, which is, what would it cost you right now to move that stuff into our hybrid world, into cloud. Cloud isn't for everyone, it's not for everything, but it's definitely now, like Edge, the ability to the ability to run workloads in different places and understand what the cost of that's going to be in advance is a real advantage. And in fact, this particular customer, the cost for them running in the cloud is actually cheaper than their current infrastructure environment. And so this is why that discussion is ongoing. What we're also able to do, you'll see from the slide, is we can go from what you're actually using, so how you've sized your VMs and everything else, and do some calculation in terms of actual resource usage and look at actually the most optimized fit in terms of cost effectiveness, which again can have a massive difference in terms of those costs. So that's all from me, and I think Justin. But if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and Ajay and Beth will pick those up. But if not, Ajay, do we have any questions already?
We do, John. There was a couple that came through midway through, but I didn't want to interrupt that lovely flow of yours. So I will just give me 2 seconds while I just pull these up. But the first one, I guess this was top of mind, given that you just spoke about the assessment. The question is, does the report work on legacy infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll plug into VMware or talk to Servers Direct. In terms of the information we're gathering, effectively you run an agent and it's looking at the WMI and performance state metrics on the server. So we're not actually able to see any of your data. The only thing that could be considered to be sensitive are your machine names. But other than that, yeah, absolutely legacy data.
Brilliant, thank you, John. Next one was, what key vendors are you seeing driving the technology?
I'll take that one. Yeah, there's I think everybody is jumping in there right now, and quite rightly so, because they all have values to add in certain spaces. Cisco, Microsoft, VMware, to name but a few. Throughout, obviously, the current situation we're in, Citrix have done an amazing job at revitalizing their business and have become a really key vendor in the edge. So I think it really comes down to, again, if you've got a vendor of choice, usually they're going to sit obviously somewhere in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and they'll have a compelling story to tell around what products and services they offer in the edge space. But again, I guess it's quite broad now. Everyone has something to offer when it comes to the edge.
That's interesting, because that actually forms nicely onto the next question. There's a couple more. If anyone else has any, please send them through. This one's quite interesting, because this could be a topic that we explore later down the line. But is SD-WAN being used more commonly now at the edge of people's network?
Well, I think that is a great question, because both myself and John have some experience of SD-WAN, and it was slow to get going. SD-WAN as a technology sounds to many people too good to be true. That ability to be flexible and dynamic in your WAN environment, lower the cost, not get locked into providers, and all those things. And I think it's one of those things where people looked at it and gone, is this really possible? Can I get rid of my MPLS and can I jump on SD-WAN? And many people didn't. They actually chose to integrate it as a secondary player. So they keep their MPLS and do SD-WAN as a secondary option so that they can grow in confidence. But there's lots of technologies out there, and John went through an evaluation process of SD-WAN and had some really good experiences. I think we're both quite the fan of SD-WAN, wouldn't you say, John?
Yeah, I think, but interestingly, again, and again, this really ties into the Bechtle Journeys piece. SD-WAN as a technology is another, typical example of the concept is there. So SD-WAN, cloud, edge. We kind of all roughly understand what we mean by those terms, but actually the product that best suits the customer is really down to those business requirements. And so some customers will be far better off with lower functionality but ease of management in terms of the ecosystem. Some are going to want a much more complicated hands-on set because they've got dedicated staff that can look after the network. And so again, I think the real key to SD-WAN, as well as all of the other edge solutions, is not the product itself, but where it fits into an organization and their resources and ability to deploy that.
Perfect. Thank you, John. There's a question coming around management, but I'm going to slightly rephrase it because I think this is what they mean. But how much ongoing management is required for a solution like this?
Well, I guess it depends because it depends on the solution. But the whole premise of, if I talk about some of those people we talked about in terms of hardware play, so hardware and software, so Nutanix, Scale, and those kind of environment, VMware, it's the same kind of management that we would have now. The advantage being that what we're trying to do in those ecosystem products, and again, this is true of Meraki and Aruba Instant AP. What we're trying to do in those management suites is take away the complexity of managing those environments. So right now, I always talk about it as part of the hyper converged discussion, but we work on the premise that a whole node will fail. We're going to lose a whole node. So everything from installing patches to migrating servers and business continuity is built around the facet of having that ease of management and knowing that something will fail. Whereas in the good old bad old days, we tended to work on the premise of, if something fails, it will be bad. We might be able to get back, but we're just not. That's not somewhere we're going on a daily basis. So I think depending on the architecture, most of those environments have self-healing, auto-aware of stuff. They'll auto move VMs if they're consuming too much space. If they get to the point where your data can't fail over, that's the point where it's going to tell you something's critical, not after you've lost your data. So I think from a management perspective, they're a lot easier to manage than some of the older technologies that are out there.
I think it's also worth noting that stuff still needs managing, and some businesses just don't necessarily have the resource to manage it. Maybe they need a complex environment because of how much legacy they're carrying, but they don't carry enough people or enough time in the bag to manage it. So that's where as a service comes in. That's where there are Bechtle fully managed solutions. We can help support services individually, or we can support you on your infrastructure as a whole. So the management could be pretty hands off, and you could still deliver the business services. So worth considering as well.
Cheers, guys. And then there was a couple of questions on cost, but what I'll do is I'll merge this all into one question. basically, the underpinning tone is it sounds expensive. So, if you guys don't mind, do you mind just giving a quick summary in terms of what a cost model looks like for a technology like this?
I guess it's the how big is the edge? In terms of as I said in the hardware and solution discussion, you can put in a 3-node cluster with all of the Microsoft licensing, installation, 3 years maintenance for less than £7,000. So that could be deemed expensive for a kind of size of site, but actually in terms of cost now, we have the ability to scale those down significantly because of licensing, because of developments in hardware. So I guess the answer is no. It's no more expensive than what you've had before, and I'm pretty sure in the case of a lot of the discussions we've had recently in terms of updating edge and robo kind of deployments. Probably we're no more expensive, but giving a lot more performance or ease of management or whatever else.
I think something I'd like to add as well is actually that if you go back to the concept of understanding what your edge is and its worth to the business, if you've got an edge in your business that you want to apply technology, but you view that technology as expensive, well, probably the motivator there is actually that edge in your business isn't worth it. If it genuinely, if you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of money for the edge, then the edge that we talk about, the service that's there, or the customer, or the whatever that aspect of your business is, if it doesn't warrant the expenditure, don't do it. That's it. Most of the technologies we're talking about now, and John mentioned earlier, are actually standard infrastructure devices by today's standards. So they've just come along so well that we can apply them easily at the edge. So again, understand your edge, understand what it's worth to you as a business, and then apply the right technology. And again, that's where that good conversation comes in.
Thank you, Just. I guess the answer to that is both an assessment approach as well, right? Do the assessment, see what it could look like, and that can give you a clear answer that's relevant to your environment. If there's anyone who wants to raise their hand, as any final questions, please feel free to do so. Whilst that occurs, what I'll just show you is, John, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Just to give you an overview of what's to come this month. So there's two more webinars. One is on technology to thrive in the new norm. So we look at the new modern platform that's occurring and how businesses are adapting, and then also about where professional services sits now, whether it's more of an internal model or whether you need to be looking at third-party resource. And of course, if you've got any feedback or ideas, please let us know, because we will then publish July based on those feedback, and we'll get them out to you guys as soon as possible. That does conclude the webinar. So thank you, John and Justin. We will stay on for a couple more minutes if anyone does have any other questions or would like to raise their hand, but we really do appreciate everyone joining, and hopefully we'll see you on 4th of June for the next one. Thank you.